Hello, friends. In July 2023, for the first time in the history of the USA, parliamentary hearings dedicated entirely to the topic of unidentified flying objects were held in Congress. As you understand, today we will be talking about the so-called flying saucers. This topic has fascinated me since childhood. Well, not exactly since childhood. In the early 80s, when I was a schoolboy, the UFOs weren't really a thing. But in the late 80s and early 90s, a torrent of information about flying saucers opened. There were articles in all magazines about people who had met aliens. There were photos, low quality, blurry photos of all these objects. Humanity in general, besides health, money, and various worldly concerns, has always been concerned with two philosophic questions. What will happen after our death? And are we alone in the universe? During the course of history, this was discussed under different philosophical lenses by different historians, scientists, but nevertheless, humans have always looked to the sky. Humans wanted to go there, and they eventually did. But most importantly, humans have asked themselves the question, who is up there? Maybe gods? Or maybe guys just like us? They, for some reason, don't come to us. Or maybe they do, and we just don't see them. That is, the topic of unidentified flying objects has been a part of human history for quite a while, and today we will try to take a closer look at it under different angles, from a skeptical viewpoint to some things that seem undeniable. Returning to the parliamentary hearings in America, let's take a look at what happened there. 3 people spoke. 2 military pilots, David Fravor, the head of a serious team called Black Aces, a seasoned military pilot with a lot of experience, David Grush, an intelligence officer, and finally Ryan Graves, also a military pilot. The military pilots talked about their encounters in the air with unidentified flying objects that they saw, observed with their own eyes, as well as on their plane's radars. David Fravor said that he first saw a flying saucer in 2004 over California. According to his testimony, from 2004 to 2021, there were 150 episodes in America alone, where people saw unidentified flying objects. And the same thing, in general, was said by the second pilot, Ryan Graves. He said that he also saw flying saucers. He knows that information about them exists in the Pentagon, and the US intelligence agencies are dealing with this issue. And all this was said under oath, to be clear. And David Grush, the intelligence officer, said that it is absolutely certain that the US government possesses the remains of crashed unidentified flying objects. The US government is engaged in reverse engineering of these objects, basically recreating them to understand the technology and use it in the military industry. The US government also has at least several bodies of aliens who are humanoids but are not Homo sapiens. All this is financed through special funds, and this program in the US has been active for quite a long time. And furthermore, David Grush also said that all people who make this information public, like former employees, they all get in trouble. They encounter pressure, at the very least. This is to say that this topic is closely guarded, if not top secret. Well, the US Department of Defense immediately denied it, saying that this was all nonsense. We, of course, record a large amount of information related to unidentified flying objects, but we are extremely skeptical about it, they said. Because there are many reports, and 99% of these reports can be attributed to comets, meteors, bolides, meteorological balloons, airships, or simply reflections of light, refraction, optical illusions, and so on. Nevertheless, there are cases, which I will tell you about today, that have indeed received documentary confirmation and cannot be attributed to storms, meteors, or the reflection of the moon on a flying seagull. It should be mentioned that NASA, the space agency of the United States, on July 9th of 2022, began forming a team to study unidentified flying objects. There was a serious reason behind that. We'll talk about this later. Such groups have been active for a long time, but this particular group was publicly announced. And it all started when, in 2019, the Pentagon published the famous footage of unidentified flying objects, which became known as Tic Tacs. It was footage from the aircraft carrier Nimitz, which I will also tell you about in detail today. I spent around 2 weeks studying these archives, the documents that are available on the FBI, Pentagon websites, the ones that are in the public domain, and naturally, there are quite interesting things. Well, let's go over everything in order and take a look. It's worth mentioning that humanity has always looked to the stars. always searching for gods and signs there. And the first known mention of an extraterrestrial civilization comes from the Sumerians. An image of something resembling a flying rocket date back to 3300 BC. And there are dingier inscriptions which could be translated as heavenly being or divine entity, referring to something unidentified. And there are many such examples, like people depicted wearing spacesuit helmets in rock carvings, in Inca culture drawings, in Maya culture drawings, and in various cultures of the Middle East and Egypt. Scientists interpret these differently. Some believe that yes, indeed, it's an astronaut depicted, while others are skeptical. We don't really know what they show. It's known that in ancient Egyptian myths, many gods descended from the heavens. Some emerged from underground, from the Nile, but mainly, all divine beings were heavenly. The most revered god, Ra, traveled across the sky in his boat. In India, in Indian mythology, there were Vimanas. These were heavenly chariots or heavenly ships in which gods flew over their armies. But we won't go into that now, because the Bible also has many references that can be interpreted as extraterrestrial presence, the presence of some aliens, but we won't delve into that because these are all attempts to stretch historical facts to fit a narrative. And in our case, it would turn into pure conspiracy theories. So, what do we know for certain? Plutarch, in 1st century BC, describes a battle that took place in Phrygia between Lucullus and a Spanish rebel. They were about to have a battle, and just as the armies were about to clash, suddenly a huge fiery object appeared in the sky, a huge sphere, and the armies were absolutely terrified. It was really a terrible omen. And we know that throughout human history, falling stars, comets, meteorites, all of these were considered to be bad omens. The armies scattered. The battle didn't happen. Titus Livius in 18 AD wrote that yes, indeed, there were bright stars moving very quickly in the sky over Rome, in the sky over Italy. In 909 AD in Byzantium, Leo the Deacon writes about a bright star appearing in the west that changed its trajectory, and everyone was astonished and expected some terrible things from it. Benvenuto Cellini, the famous Italian sculptor, describes his journey from Florence to Rome, and when their group climbed the mountains above Florence to turn onto the road to Rome, they saw that over Florence there was a huge thing, a huge spherical something. He was astonished by it and recorded it in his diary. Historical chronicles mention large fiery balls appearing over cities, sometimes during dramatic events like large fires. These spheres were described as hovering and then flying away, often shimmering in different colors: purple, blue, bright orange, red, green, and so on. Well, in general, it is something that no one could find an explanation for. In 1876, the first work by the Frenchman Camille Flammarion appears titled Residents of the Celestial Worlds. It had a very long title like Residents of the Celestial Worlds from the perspective of philosophical views, science, etc. At that time, there was no real science about space, but nevertheless, he tried to describe what there might be in other worlds, that we are not alone in the universe, and that we are visited from time to time by these alien guests and so on. Well, obviously this was largely a pseudoscientific philosophical discussion and blah blah blah, because there was no evidence, no sources, and the main thing was that humanity had no technology for research back then. Time passes, the First World War, the Second World War, and after the Second World War, although there were many cases, of course, even during the First World War, these unidentified flying objects were seen. And during the Second World War, there were many military reports where people testified that there was something strange in the sky. But after the war, after the Second World War, a real madness began. Where did the term flying saucer come from? It was coined on June 24th, 1947. Private jet pilot Kenneth Arnold was flying over the Cascade Mountains in Washington State, United States, and he saw a chain of unidentified objects in the air that didn't look like planes, balloons, or airships. These were discs flying in a chain, flying very fast and then disappearing. And he recorded that he saw some flying saucers. And since then, flying discs or flying saucers haven't left the media. It all happened on June 24th, 1947. Then, on July 4th of the same year, literally just a few weeks later, there was a civilian plane DC-3 Douglas United Airlines. It was flying, and the pilot and flight attendant, and some passengers, although later it was said that the passengers in the cabin didn't see it, but the flight attendant and the pilot saw something glowing with red lights, resembling a saucer or a plate, which quickly flew past and disappeared. And in July of that same year, 4 days after the civilian aircraft saw a flying saucer, the largest groundbreaking sensation which laid the foundation for ufology happened, the so-called Roswell incident. So what happened? W. Mac Brazel, Mac is his nickname, a farmer who herds sheep in New Mexico. On July 3, 1947, he notices that some sheep are missing from his flock, so he goes to look for them and stumbles upon something he's never seen before. Strange debris are scattered all over his property. The debris are very strange, large pieces of foil scattered around. And this foil, when you crumple it, crush it, it straightens right back into a sheet. There are some blocks of unknown metal. It doesn't bend, you can't cut it with a knife, and it doesn't react to fire, it stays cold. There are some ropes with patterns on them, resembling either hieroglyphs, Chinese or Japanese, or some strange script. But he described them as hieroglyphs because that was the only thing he could associate them with. All these debris are scattered around, the sheep are gone, and Mac, as an upstanding citizen of the United States of America, goes to the sheriff and says, "Listen, friend, my sheep are gone. That's okay, I'll find them, but I have no idea what I have on my property." And the sheriff says, "Wait, what do you have there?" He says, "Well, there are these things lying around that hut." The sheriff contacts the nearest military base, and military personnel come and start collecting all the debris. At this point, Mac, the farmer, goes to the radio. It's worth mentioning that local radio stations in America were very popular back then, so he goes there and starts talking about the missing sheep on air. He says he saw a flash of lightning, heard thunder, a loud noise the night before. So basically, there are pieces of some kind of saucer, or not a saucer, maybe a balloon. And the whole place is littered with all this junk. And no one knows what is this strange thing that fell from the sky. And they cut off the broadcast, they cut off the radio broadcast. Later on, there's a debate whether the broadcast was actually cut off or not, because I'll mention the son of the radio station owner. But still, the whole thing gets out in the open. The military collects everything from the farmer's property. And on July 8th, the military base releases a press statement saying that the American military has found a flying saucer, pieces of its hull, and so on and so forth. The press release comes out on the morning of July 8th. By the evening of July 8th, from New Mexico to Chicago, it's all over the newspapers. All the headlines are screaming that the American military has found a flying saucer, an unidentified flying object. The term's already widely known, everyone already understands what it's about. The American military has found something alien. On July 9th, General Ramey, an Air Force general, issues a denial. "Dear friends, it was just a weather balloon that crashed. The farmer and military didn't recognize it. An incorrect press statement was issued. Just an ordinary weather balloon." So he was like, "Don't worry, nothing has happened at all." What in the world does that mean, nothing's happened? The newspapers tell otherwise, so the government is definitely hiding something from us. And for a long time, there's a lot of buzz around all that. And then, well, time passes and everyone kind of forgets about it. Because America is a country where, like in any other country, lots of events happen daily, so people forget about this saucer. But the obsessions have already started. And this whole UFO thing gains terrific traction. People start getting into it. This story starts a mass fever, and in 1950, the famous Tully Papyrus appears. Tiffany Thayer, a journalist, publishes an article saying that an ancient Egyptian papyrus was found in the Vatican, fully deciphered, and it describes the first contact in human history with an extraterrestrial civilization with an unidentified flying object. The hysteria continues for a couple of years, then the journalist is caught red-handed, or he admits himself that it was a fabrication. There was no papyrus. But the Roswell incident I've told you about did not stop there. People are obsessed with it. Everyone starts getting interested in it. By 1979, the incident has already grown into mythology. And Area 51 has appeared, where the American government supposedly keeps the bodies of aliens and those flying saucer debris. All of this is already a conspiracy. It lives in people's minds. The authorities are hiding it. Well, it's all a kind of a running joke. And in 1979, an officer named Marcel gives an interview to two researchers who are writing a book about Roswell, Moore and Friedman, and shows photographs. He says, "I was one of those who found this flying saucer and we found it, collected its parts and transported it on board of a bomber plane, moved it to another military base, and here are my photos. And he shows photos. He's with a sheet of foil. He says, "This is a real photo. Afterwards, they ordered us to never talk about it. They gave us some pieces of metal, ordered us to tell everyone that it was just a weather balloon, and that's what we did. In fact, it had nothing to do with any weather balloon. The metal, the rods really didn't melt, couldn't be cut with a knife. They didn't heat up from the flame. The foil crumpled and then smoothed back out. The ropes had hieroglyphs, and there were markings on the rods that resembled hieroglyphs. All of this had absolutely nothing to do with known kinds of American military equipment, Japanese military equipment, or any other military equipment. It definitely had nothing to do with earthly civilization." Moore and Friedman go further and find the son of the radio station owner, he says. "Yes, I was young, but I absolutely remember that my dad had that farmer on air. He started talking about aliens, about a flying saucer, and someone called us, and the broadcast was cut off. The ministry, I'm not sure which one, or perhaps the Broadcasting Commission, they called the station and said, 'We'll revoke your license if you don't stop stirring up panic in society. It's the Cold War. There's widespread anxiety, and if journalists start saying that unknown flying objects are flying here freely, there will be panic in society. You're fueling it. We'll revoke your license, so stop immediately.' Then they found the guy called Gerald Anderson. He was a child at the time, and he says, 'Yes, my father, along with that farmer, he was his neighbor. There wasn't just a saucer. There were 3 corpses.' According to different sources, 3, some say 4. And here's one of the descriptions that one of the witnesses shared, who saw the crashed flying saucer because what fell on Mac's property were its remains, and the saucer itself fell in another place nearby, a couple of miles away. A witness was driving with his friend, and they saw that saucer, drove closer, and there, on the ground, were 3 bodies. 2 breathless, one was breathing heavily as if his ribs were broken, and there was a 4th person who was helping, providing assistance. And when he saw people, he curled up, frightened. And from here, the mythology began. The well-known silhouette and drawing of the alien with a huge head, almond-shaped eyes. This drawing, it all started there. That's how they first described them, saying, yes, they were dressed in suits made of some kind of metallic fabric and similar boots and so on. Well, okay, yes, this might be nonsense. And we don't know for sure. Although there are people who testified under oath before Congress, they say that there are biological remains of humanoids in the possession of the American government. Later, they found the daughters of Sergeant Brown, one of the members of the team that collected the wreckage. And the daughters said that their dad had told their mom that they had found something unusual, not a weather balloon, and they had to lie to everyone that it was a weather balloon. It's a completely different story. It has absolutely nothing to do with Earth. In 1977, the Air Force made a statement that, at that time, they were testing some kind of weapon or something in that area, and were dropping mannequins on parachutes. Well, Americans are impressionable, and they mistook the mannequins for aliens. But the story developed, and in 1994, the American government, more precisely the Pentagon, said that indeed there was an incident, but they did not find a flying saucer, and it was not a weather balloon. We lied to you then. It was another balloon. It was Project Mogul. We were launching large balloons into the stratosphere that monitored foreign military activities. They recorded magnetic impulses from space and monitored foreign military bases. And one such balloon crashed, and it was mistaken for a flying saucer. Where did the hieroglyphs on those ropes come from? There are indeed ropes in this balloon. They were woven with adhesive tape, which was made by factories producing children's toys. And it looked like hieroglyphs. That's it. No mystery here. Indeed, that's the story. Immediately, a counter-version was thrown into the media that these could have been Japanese bombs. I've told you before that the Japanese wanted to drop biological weapons over California using balloons. Those were these Japanese balloons, although the war had already ended by that time. But the balloon kept flying and finally reached the US in 1947. Then another interesting event happens. In April 2011, the FBI publishes a report by Agent Houghton, which was written in 1947 based on that incident. The agent says that indeed they found a saucer and 3 bodies. The Pentagon did not give us any access, immediately said that it was top secret, and everything had to be reported directly to the president. The FBI was denied access. This document is available on the FBI website and can be accessed. But the report was dismissed. They said that the FBI agent had just repeated rumors. At that time, there were two scammers in New Mexico, Newton and Gebauer, who told trusting rural residents that they had an alien tech for dowsing, like a dowsing rod that allows to find water, or it could find oil or gold. And they sold these rods to gullible American farmers, saying they were of extraterrestrial origin. This rumor was reported in the FBI agent's report. Well, we respect the intelligence services of different countries, right? Of course, yes. It's easy to believe that the FBI had such an idiot working for them who heard a rumor about dowsing and sent a report citing it to HQ, and also said there were 3 bodies of aliens. It probably wasn't like that at all, but still. So, in 1994, they insisted that what really happened was related to the Mogul Project that was intended to monitor foreign nuclear activities. And then, in 1995, a video surfaced that became famous. A 1947 video titled Alien Autopsy. It was an old film, seemingly set in 1950s, or late 1940s to early 1950s. It shows 2 surgeons in white coats in protective gear and 2 people who look like trained soldiers dissecting an alien and removing organs one by one. This film was sold to Fox News for $125,000, and its copies were sold for $70 each. It was a huge business. It was sold by Ray Santilli, British producer, who said that this film was from 1947, and it was specifically about the Roswell incident. And he said that he bought it a long time ago, and indeed everyone says that, well, first of all, the autopsy looks absolutely authentic. It's impossible to find any kind of inconsistency, and the setting is appropriate. It looks like the film is genuine. The film was made by Kodak Film Company, and Kodak said, "Give us the original, we'll tell you if it's the real thing or a fake." The producer gave them a piece of overexposed film, on which there was nothing. The film turned out to be real. Indeed, it was from that time, but there was nothing of value recorded on it. It could be just a random piece of old film from that period. People started looking closely at the film, and it turned out that back in that year, in 1947, there were no these kinds of posters as there are on film. And it had a top secret label with a date, and this label didn't exist back then. In the next Fox News broadcast, they removed this label and so on. Later, Ray Santilli said that, yes, in fact, it is a very high-quality fake. We made this humanoid out of rubber, stuffed it, you see, with chicken entrails, but actually, why it looks so genuine is because I recreated it from memory. I saw the real film. It was shown to me. There really was an autopsy of a humanoid. It was all recorded on video. I just recreated it. So, since then, the myth of Area 51, where the bodies of these aliens and the flying saucer are stored, has existed and thrived. And later I will even tell you about a flash mob that took place at this Area 51. The story with Area 51, it continued on its own course, and in 1948 there was another incident. A flying saucer was detected in the sky over the United States of America, and 3 Mustang planes from a military base chased after it. 2 returned to the base, 1 continued the pursuit and disappeared. It was later found crashed. The pilot was found dead. There was something strange with his wristwatch. It stopped at 4:15. And the plane disappeared from radars at 5:15, so there are some inconsistencies with the time. But this story was also suppressed rather quickly. In 1951, again, in the United States of America, the Lubbock Lights appeared, a famous story. On August 25th, near the town of Lubbock, Texas, a chain of red lights was recorded moving rapidly. Lots of observers recorded it, and naturally it hit the newspapers. On the same day, professors from Texas Technological College were studying the sky and also saw this chain of red lights. On August 26th, the radars of the Washington Radar Station, the Washington Observation Stations, detected unidentified flying objects which were flying quickly and then quickly disappeared. And on August 31st of that same year, a student, whose surname was Hart, saw this series of red lights twice. And at one point, he went out with a Kodak camera. And when the lights returned, he photographed them. The official version that was released to the public was that it was a reflection of light and fog, or the reflection of light from large birds in the sky, creating an optical illusion. This was fed to the public. By that time in the United States of America, a commission called Grudge operates. It was created in 1951 and was engaged in collecting information about unidentified flying objects. In 1952, Project Blue Book appears. Blue Book, by order of the President of the United States, meticulously records all cases known to the public regarding unidentified flying objects. The task of these two groups, well, Grudge later became Blue Book, is very simple: to find out the nature of these objects, and most importantly, to determine whether these objects pose a threat to the national security of the United States of America. In 1953, the physicist Robertson's group will be assembled, and all these groups will conclude that there is no threat to the United States of America from these unidentified flying objects. Then another very interesting story begins, and it is documented. It is in newspapers. It has thousands of witnesses. This incident entered history under the name of Washington Merry-Go-Round, a long period from July 12th to July 29th, 1952. The event starts as follows. At 11:40 p.m., either on July 12th or July 19th, the Washington Airport air traffic controller sees 7 unidentified objects on the radar. He tries to make contact, but none of the objects respond. Moreover, they either hover or change course rapidly. He contacts a colleague at another observation station, and the colleague says, "Yes, I see these 7 objects." The 7 objects move towards Washington, and then just hover over the White House and Congress. This is at 23:40. Then there are phone calls back and forth, and by 3 a.m. the next day, 2 jet fighters arrive to patrol the skies over Washington, but they do not see any unidentified objects and return to base. At 5:30 in the morning, the objects appear again over Washington. Naturally, in the morning, all the newspapers come out with headlines saying we are attacked by Martians, Saturnians, Venusians, or whoever. In Washington, there are a huge number of witnesses who saw several unidentified flying objects over the city. On July 26th at 9:30 p.m., all radar stations in Washington detect the objects, meaning they've arrived again at 9:30 p.m. again in the evening. Note that. Again, it takes 2 hours to figure out who is going to fly where. Bureaucracy is the same in all countries. At 11:20 p.m., 2 fighter jets arrive, and one of these fighters, they see these unidentified flying objects, and 4 objects surround one of the fighters. The fighter requests instructions from the base on what to do, and they tell him, "Keep silent." The UFO circles around him and then flies away. On the 23rd, it's all over the newspapers again, with an incredible amount of hysteria. And on July 29th, the government of the United States, the Department of Defense of the United States, holds a press conference where they say, "You know, it's a unique natural phenomenon. These are meteors and bolides that came from space, and it's an optical illusion." At this point, people who have a basic understanding of astronomy say that, you know, that's all well and good, but meteors and bolides do not get picked up by radars. It can't be that way. Well, it can't, but it can. And they calm the public down as best they can. This is the famous Washington merry-go-round. Well, obviously after such stories as in New Mexico and Washington, no one believes the government anymore. The authorities are hiding things, and conspiracy theories arise that we are indeed being watched from space. UFOs come here and they are possibly controlling us. Or maybe they are in cahoots with the authorities, and the authorities are receiving some technologies from them which they are hiding from us. But again, this is all just rumors. People appear who have not only seen flying saucers, but also traveled with them. They say they were abducted and taken to Venus, Mars, and various other planets. This is another topic in ufology, the topic of contactees, people who were abducted by aliens or invited to fly with them. We will not delve into this topic now because it's all about believing or not. Like, yeah, I was abducted and saw Saturn. There's also a lot of interesting things there. A man who describes this has never been in space. He's just some ordinary manager. He was abducted, and he describes the glimmering effect of fireflies in space, which only astronauts have seen. He couldn't even have read about it, but he describes it accurately. Well, it's clear that now talking about this is like telling grandmother's tales. And this is generally just a conspiracy theory, but the topic of the contactees is a whole different story. In 1965, in a small town of Kecksburg, United States, a fiery ball falls into the forest, seen by some number of witnesses. The military promptly arrive, load this huge cone-shaped contraption onto a military truck, and take it away. Then a rumor spreads that it was a piece of a crashed foreign spy satellite, but it did not resemble any known foreign satellites. And in Kecksburg, it remains an urban legend that an UFO crashed there, and the authorities hid everything from us. Everywhere, the topic of unidentified flying objects spreads. And in Europe in 1966, the phenomenon of Ummo arises. I'm sorry, I don't know if I pronounced the word Ummo correctly. It's a very strange story, but it's definitely worth telling. On February 6, 1966, in Madrid, a contactee by the name of Peña sees a flying saucer with a symbol like this, a hieroglyph on its underside. He sees it and reports it, and it makes it into the newspapers. After some time, another contactee by the name of Sesma receives documents typed on a typewriter. And these are documents from the civilization of Ummo, and each document, each page is stamped with this seal, like this hieroglyph. These letters begin to circulate in Spain and southern France. In 1966, Ummo shared with different people, newspapers, editorial offices, researchers, and scientists 260 letters totaling 1,000 typewritten pages. Each page was marked with a pictogram typed on a typewriter. What did these letters say? That there was a civilization from the planet Ummo that landed on Earth. A group landed, and they landed in Provence on April 28, 1950, and they were studying our civilization. And so they periodically contact our civilization. They write letters. These letters are intricate, half philosophical, half quasi-scientific, but obviously written by some people who have at least some understandings of philosophy, science, and astronomy. By the early 2000s, there were 1,300 pages of such letters, which were received, I repeat, mostly in Spain and France. The last message in France and Spain was received in 2009, and since 2012, the Ummo's have been communicating with us through Twitter. Finally, the internet was probably brought to the Alps, to Provence. These letters talk about how the planet lives, about the planet Ummo, where each person is a neural connection. In their society, senses of smell and taste are very important. They write about various events about how they came here to prevent a nuclear catastrophe. In 1989, the letters from Ummo accused the United States of inventing AIDS in a laboratory. They left their coordinates, which, based on indirect evidence, matched the Wolf 424 star. But astronomers actually say that in this location there are no stellar bodies, no stars, no planets. In the Ummo letters, this is explained by saying it is simply stardust that hides their planet from prying eyes. The morality of the Ummo society is a kind of a spin on Neo-Kantianism, and some researchers of these letters say that the world described there is very similar to Borges's book Tlon Uqbar Orbis Tertius. There is such a book by Borges, and the whole story is literally taken from there. There are various versions. There's a whole movement in France and Spain researching Ummo, with several theories. The first one, these are indeed aliens who came here to warn us, perhaps to save us from nuclear war, and they write us letters and warnings. The second version is that these are leftist groups, leftist parties, mainly Spanish, who during Franco's dictatorship had no other way to communicate with the public and used these letters. Another version is that these are sects, and the main version is that these are intelligence agencies. Which ones? Perhaps the CIA or other agencies. Disinformation campaigns using such methods were known during the Cold War. Letters concerning ideological threats might have been part of such campaigns, possibly involving agencies like the CIA. And finally, in 1992, Peña, the first contactee, admitted that he forged all these letters. His group wrote them, but his associates, or rather people who studied with him, people who know him, say that he was not educated enough to be able to write such letters. And yet, this remains to this day a kind of semi-conspiracy theory, kind of social movement, but nonetheless important for that part of Europe. It must be said that the 1960s to 1970s were the heyday of ufology, with a huge influence on mass culture, movies about aliens, comics, music, synthesizers that sound like some kind of extraterrestrial melody. Holmes, the famous project of Matti Suronen UFO House. It was built for skiers. Look at how it looks. It's a flying saucer with round windows, a very convenient design, snow slides off it, and it's convenient to place it in the mountains. Such houses began to be built all over Europe. It became quite fashionable, of course. They were placed at ski resorts, mainly outside urban spaces, outside the metropolis, that is, somewhere out of the city, But nonetheless, all this is part of the architecture. And all this became very, very fashionable. But I repeat, everything I just told you are semi-confirmed things, semi-myths, semi-fables. But there are stories that are documented, and they are 100% solid facts. And the main story is the story that happened in Iran before the Islamic Revolution on September 19, 1976. At 0:30 a.m. in Shemiran district, calls start pouring in from residents. They're calling army officials. There's something crazy happening in our sky. We have some huge celestial body up here. Well, some object is hovering there, glowing with orange light, shimmering in orange, green, purple. It's hanging there, visible, from like 110 kilometers away. Their calls are transferred to the military people in charge. And General Yosefi, the district commander, after receiving this information, says, "Listen, well, we have to react to all these calls," and sends up a Phantom interceptor, a combat aircraft. At 1:30, the Phantom pilot takes off and reports back to the base that he sees the object from 110 kilometers away. It's just that bright, and he is ordered to approach it. All of this is documented, radio communications. All of it is easily available, all of it is recorded. He approaches, and when he gets within 40 kilometers of the object, at that moment all his avionics shut down. That is, all the onboard computers, mechanisms, everything just shuts down. The pilot gets scared and returns to the base, but the object doesn't move. The object is hanging in the air. At 1:40, another interceptor, an F-4, is launched, piloted by Jafari, who later becomes, by the way, an Air Force general, and strange things happen to it. He approaches the object and sees that from this large sphere, which is shimmering with all the colors of the rainbow, a second object separates. And the pilot gets scared because the smaller object is flying towards him. The pilot wants to shoot it down with a missile. He prepares the missile, and immediately his entire navigation system shuts down. He cannot launch the missile. And he returns to the base. This smaller object, which separated from the mothership, let's call it that, is flying behind him. It flies under the plane, almost hitting it. The pilot tries to eject, but he can't because all the devices are malfunctioning. Nothing is working. He moves away from the ship, from the unidentified flying object, and all his equipment starts working again. He sees 4 objects. 4 more objects detach from the large ship. One chases him while 2 others hover, and the third one dives down and, instead of crashing, lands softly. Moreover, perhaps, let's say 2 pilots were just seeing things. People who called were also delusional. But there was already technology at that time. These were 1970s. The nearest airfield's radars recorded that these small objects arrived, circled around the tower of the air traffic control center, shut down all the equipment, and flew back. Jafari says he had never seen anything like that in his life. The objects moved at a speed that no known military, Air Force aircraft of any army in the world could reach. And the large object was absolutely colossal, visible from 110 kilometers, glowing brightly, and the small objects glowed brightly too. The one that fell to the ground, or rather landed on the ground, illuminated the rocks around it, so it was very clearly visible. Each object was 5 meters in diameter, and the main object looked like a medium-sized city bus or a civilian Boeing aircraft. Fast forward, on October 1st, 1976, Jafari's communications with the military base and the airport were published, so all of this was there on tape. On the same day, the American embassy in Morocco saw that UFO, which was reported through diplomatic channels to Washington. All of this was thoroughly documented, and after Jafari returned to the base, he was, naturally, interviewed, and American officials were also present at the interview. The incident was summarized in a 5-page document about the Tehran incident, where everything is described minute by minute based on the testimonies of Jafari and the second pilot about how the events unfolded. And the situation in Iran was like a bomb explosion, because, indeed, it was obvious that we encountered something we had never seen before. It was really an extraterrestrial object. And then the information started reaching Europe and America, and a media hysteria began. And 10 days later, even Henry Kissinger spoke and said, "Listen, yes, the story is very strange, but we have all consulted with the scientific community and understood that it was a satellite or a meteor." And that was the end of the discussion. Then, in 2007, at the National Press Club in Washington, Jafari was invited there to talk about flying saucers, and he, word for word, accurately repeated everything he said in 1976, so it's clear that people saw it, equipment recorded it, and this story definitely took place. It wasn't just one old woman telling another, who then told me so that I could tell you. The next story, November 11th, 1979. A Spanish plane is flying a civil aircraft taking off from Salzburg, Austria, flying to Las Palmas, landing in Mallorca to refuel, taking off again, and then the pilots of the plane see a huge flying saucer with red navigation lights. They don't understand that it's a flying saucer. At first, they think it's some kind of plane. The plane is on a dangerous parallel course. The pilot performs maneuvers after consulting with the ground, and the unidentified flying object follows him, and the pilot of the plane gets scared. He's afraid they're going to crash. He requests an emergency landing and lands in Valencia. The radar at Valencia Airport detects this object they call the nearest military base. A Mirage F-1 plane takes off, flies to this object, and sees that it's a huge saucer. With red navigation lights, the pilot of the plane reports everything he sees. As the plane gets closer, its avionics fail, meaning the systems shut down. The pilot at some point gets afraid of losing control of the plane. Nonetheless, he makes a maneuver, goes for a second pass around this UFO. The UFO moves at a not very high speed, but as soon as the plane approaches it, it slightly accelerates. Then, apparently, the UFO gets tired of these games and takes off. Its speed exceeds that of the jet fighter. The jet fighter follows it, realizes it's running out of fuel, and returns to the base in Valencia, while the saucer flies off to the coast of Africa. This gets into the press, and the national authorities meet to discuss what it was. The pilot is questioned. Then there are theories that, in fact, it was radiation from some chemical plant in Valencia, which was refracted in the atmosphere and knocked out the avionics. Like that was an optical illusion, which doesn't align at all with the equipment failure. Then another theory emerges that the pilot's avionics were disabled because at that time, the 6th Fleet of the United States of America was based in the Mediterranean. There were tensions with Iran at that time. They were preparing for some military operation. They had powerful infrared radiation. With it, they suppressed various aircraft and enemy missiles. But the Spanish pilot was experienced, he says. Listen, I know where the 6th Fleet was. We are a member of NATO. I am confident that no radiation could have reached me. But the story was nevertheless hushed up. At first, it became a national event in Spain, and it was also absolutely accurately and clearly recorded. Different things were happening around the world. There are many testimonies that people saw unidentified flying objects. There are theories about special state security departments tasked with monitoring and potentially controlling information related to UFO sightings, especially if they cause public concern. Some stories even suggest the existence of departments focused on studying potential extraterrestrial technologies. However, the topic was often heavily stigmatized by mainstream science in many places. Researchers and ufologists sometimes faced skepticism and censure rather than outright persecution in later decades. Academics often dismissed the subject, urging against stirring up public interest with nonsense. Later, particularly during periods of increased press freedom in various countries, media coverage of UFOs became more widespread. Newspapers and magazines began featuring stories about sightings, alleged alien encounters, and anomalous zones, alongside other previously restricted topics. Nevertheless, the level of official documentation and investigation varied significantly across different regions and incidents, with cases like Tehran or Valencia having more accessible records compared to others. It's hard to find comparably well-documented cases from certain periods or regions in the public domain. So these are stories of the days past. So now, here we are at the congressional hearings, which didn't happen in the United States out of nowhere. There are a lot of photos, numerous eyewitness accounts, and videos taken with shaking hands by eyewitnesses. All of this can be disputed, called a fake, subjected to skeptical analysis, but there's something recorded by the American military that for a long time said that nothing like this existed. But then they made it public, and this is probably the most well-documented case in modern history. I'm talking about the Tic Tac story. Tic Tac, are those mints you put in your mouth. So the Tic Tac story goes as follows. In November 2004, the U.S. Navy aircraft carrier Nimitz and the cruiser Princeton were on the border of the United States and Mexico in the waters, conducting some sort of exercises. Whatever they were practicing there is unknown. On November 10th, the radar of the aircraft carrier and the radars of the cruiser detected something in the sky, some unidentified flying objects. They reported this to the ship's captains, and I don't remember who was first, the Nimitz aircraft carrier or the cruiser. In any case, the captain of the ship that first detected it says, "Listen here, reset the electronics. What nonsense, these objects are just hanging there and moving." They reboot the detection systems, and they show even more clearly that in the air there is a group of unidentified flying objects. At an altitude of 8,500 meters, moving at a speed of 190 kilometers, they fly, then disappear, then come back again, and this continues for several days. And on November 14th, when they appear again, interceptors are sent from the aircraft carrier, a Hornet attack aircraft, and 2 fighters along with it. The Hornet was piloted by a pilot named Kurth, who at some point saw a whirlpool on the surface of the water, a vortex 100 meters in diameter. And the vortex was there because below there was a cross-shaped object which looked like the outline of a Boeing airplane, but no planes were reported crashed at that time. They checked with all agencies. No planes had disappeared from the radars, and above the water was another smaller object, and then another object flew up to it, and they all looked like Tic Tac mints. One of the fighters began making aggressive maneuvers towards these flying Tic Tacs. The Tic Tacs evaded, and when the pilot made another such aggressive maneuver, these Tic Tacs, against all laws of physics, sharply changed their course and disappeared, and the disturbance in the water vanished. The pilots returned to the aircraft carrier and reported what they saw. The command then makes a decision. The command of the aircraft carrier decides to launch 4 more Super Hornets, equipped with infrared recording systems. These Hornets approach and see this group of unidentified flying objects and begin to record them using these infrared sensors, infrared observation systems, because cameras cannot capture them. The objects either hover at an altitude of 18 kilometers or sharply descend to an altitude of 150 m above the water. This continues, and the infrared equipment captures everything. And then the unidentified flying objects fly away. All these recordings are made by the carrier's crew. In 2004, naturally, the command does not inform anyone about it. Everything is immediately superclassified, all pilots are ordered not to talk about it, and so on and so forth. In 2017, a small fragment is published by the private research organization To the Stars. In 2017, they announce, here's a recording. It's genuine, provided by American Navy, and we found it back in 2007, so 3 years after the actual event, and we found it on the servers of the company Vision Unlimited, a company that deals with special effects. And they had it as an example of how alien objects should look like, their movements of flying saucers. Someone uploaded this recording onto the servers, we don't know who. They passed it on to us, we showed it. Everyone says that this is, of course, a fake, some nonsense. And then one of the pilots of the Hornet comes forward and says that this recording is genuine. The recording is part of a 10-minute recording, which exists and was made by our planes. After we landed on the Nimitz aircraft carrier, the command contacted the higher-ups. A helicopter arrived. They confiscated everything from us, all the recordings, the entire onboard observation system, all the radars were reset. And everyone was made to sign a non-disclosure agreement that we saw nothing, we know nothing. Both the cruiser and the aircraft carrier rebooted all systems, but the journalists started pressing the military. And in 2019, the Navy acknowledged the authenticity of these videos and said, yes, indeed, this and 2 more videos are authentic recordings, and we have 1 more recording, made at another geographical location from the deck of the aircraft carrier Theodore Roosevelt, where the same thing was observed. The recording was authenticated, and then closed hearings in Congress, everything under the top secret classification, and eventually, in 2020, these recordings were published on the Pentagon's official website. They are available, you can watch them, and they show small dots moving in space, these recordings made by infrared surveillance systems. How to explain it? Well, again, are they bolides, meteors, or radiation, or geese flying, reflecting moonlight? No way, and the Pentagon basically says that we cannot find an explanation for this. Everyone saw it. Moreover, it was recorded by sensitive, ultra-sensitive equipment. But we can't explain what happened. We encountered something that we cannot explain. And most likely, it is not the product of human civilization. That's the story. It is documented, and you can watch it for free without registration on the Pentagon's website. I must say that ufologists in the public consciousness, with the help of official structures, have long been considered little more than quirky professors, like as if they are some kinds of fools in glasses running around with flying saucers. Look, ha ha ha. But everything has a real explanation. Well, I have given you at least 3 examples which humanity has not found an explanation for. People have seen it, and moreover, the equipment is developing over time, and it recorded everything. On the one hand, ufologists were subject to vilification, but on the other hand, there was pop culture. There are journalists who developed and picked it up and scaled it up. But there are also people who are completely obsessed. Let me tell you one story. A Scottish hacker, Gary McKinnon, played video games since childhood. In the 90s, he started programming, and he read about the Roswell incident. He became so obsessed with it that he began searching everywhere for traces of alien beings and traces of how the government was hiding them. He started coding, he wrote Trojan malware, and from February 1st, 2001 to March 19th, 2002, he was hacking NASA servers. And he hacked these servers. He didn't steal anything anywhere if he entered the system, cracked a password by the way. He shared that many passwords were just amazing. In the username field, you enter admin and leave the password field empty. And that's it, you're in. Well, that's how he explained it, tracing some IP addresses in public access. And at some point, he hacked NASA. He was caught red-handed because he mixed up time zones. Then he uploaded from the NASA site to his home email, not very professional. So he was downloading information, and the Americans, as they say, caught him red-handed and began demanding extradition. And this process went on for quite a long time, until 2010, I think. Finally, a decision was made on extradition, then it was canceled, then made again. Finally, Theresa May, who was then the Home Secretary, said that the guy had a personality disorder and wouldn't last long in prison, especially far from home. No, dear Americans, we won't extradite him to you. So, what did Gary McKinnon find? What did he discover, according to himself? He hacked NASA servers and found information about the Disclosure Project. At least 400 people are involved in this project, according to him, writing reports. These people work in civil aviation, in military aviation, in the space industry, in the chemical industry, and they write reports on how technologies from captured or crashed alien ships are being adapted by the United States government. Perhaps the idea for Men in Black came from this. In particular, it is mentioned that NASA has a special unit called Building 8, which has a department dedicated to UFO research, and now we know it exists. They're responsible for recruiting volunteers who study the UFOs. But McKinnon says that this Building 8 collects all the information that appears in the public domain and erases the real evidence of UFO existence from there, so that people do not know anything about it, to prevent panic and keep all this information secret. He also found a group called non-terrestrial officers. These are people who moved from unit to unit, but he couldn't find these people in the open member lists of these units. So that's that. When he was asked, "Dude, can we see some evidence?" He said that the internet was slow back then. In 2001, nothing loaded from the servers, so unfortunately, he didn't have any documents, but he definitely saw them, he says. So you can say that he's a crazy scientist, or maybe he's not, but the story was quite well known in England at some point. And many astronauts said that during their flights they saw something. American astronauts as well. Some flight logs from early space missions allegedly contain descriptions or drawings of unusual phenomena observed above the horizon, described as bright, star-like objects moving rapidly or exhibiting unusual characteristics. However, official explanations often attribute these to natural phenomena or debris. In conclusion, I want to talk about that Area 51, where the bodies of aliens are supposedly stored in a crashed flying saucer. In 2013, the United States of America officially acknowledged the existence of Area 51, partly because foreign intelligence agencies had photographed it. Intelligence services from various nations were certainly interested in the activities there. The US admitted that, yes, it is a closed area, but denied having flying saucers there. At first, they tested U-2 spy planes there. Then they tested the F-117 Stealth. And now, according to rumors, this super famous SR-91 Aurora project, a stealth bomber. It is supposedly being developed there. This area is closed, this area is classified. And in 2019, there was a flash mob. A Facebook page was created. Storm Area 51, because Area 51 has a huge number of fans. Let's all come together and storm this area, open it up, and find out if there are aliens there or not. Moreover, Keanu Reeves, Arnold Schwarzenegger, Elon Musk, Chuck Norris, David Duchovny, and his co-star from the show X-Files. They all subscribed to that page. And on September 20th, 2019, about 3,000 people gathered around Area 51. There were music festivals, and about 100 people tried to storm the base. About 40 people made it to the gates, and the military police arrived immediately. 5 were arrested, and the storm did not take place, but nevertheless, Area 51 exists. Whether the remnants of the Roswell incident, the flying saucer, and the bodies of the aliens are stored there, we do not know. What do I want to say in conclusion? Oh, how many wonderful discoveries YouTube, Wikipedia, and the websites of the FBI and Pentagon have for us. Surely other nations' special services also have classified information on this topic. Indeed, humanity, since the beginning of its existence, from the very start of its existence, has encountered the unknown, the mysterious, the mystical, surrounding it with mysticism, conspiracy, surrounding it with mythology, attributing to it all sorts of extraterrestrial origins. But nevertheless, there are facts that I have told you today, and indeed, there is something to it. People can be crazy, impressionable, psychotic, conspiratorial. I love conspiracy theories, and I really like conspiracy theorists a lot. But nevertheless, these cases which I have told you about, they are documented, they existed, they are recorded. And the question, what is this, hangs in the air. And if there is a question, what is this? Then the second question is, does it pose a threat for us? How will the government use it? And ultimately, why do they suppress information about it? Maybe they know something, that if we found out about it, the planet would just have a psychosis, panic, and run off to Mars? We do not know, but nevertheless, unidentified flying objects still stir our imaginations, and indeed, there is something out there about which society does not yet have full information. Thank you for watching my historical videos. Thank you for your likes, and actually please share in the comments to this video. Maybe you have seen a flying saucer yourself, maybe your relatives have seen a flying saucer, or maybe you know of some documents that I missed, or some cases that I did not cover. Write comments. I will be super glad to read them. Thank you.